The marketplace was alive with a cacophony of noises, traders bartering, aliens haggling over rare goods, and the faint hum of starships taking off in the distance. Ryan Reynolds slouched against a rusted railing, his cybernetic arm twitching with subtle spasms. The arm, a relic of a war that no one talked about anymore, was a constant reminder of why he avoided crowded places like this. But here he was, against his better judgment, in the heart of the galaxy's underbelly. The auction block loomed ahead, a raised platform surrounded by a sea of eager bidders. This wasn't just any marketplace, it was the infamous Zorthan Exchange, a hub for black market deals, exotic goods, and unfortunately slaves. Ryan's stomach turned as he watched the procession of beings paraded onto the stage. A Klaxian miner with 6 arms, an Argarian child barely old enough to walk, and finally, a tall, silver-skinned female with striking violet eyes. Her presence commanded attention. She walked with defiance, her chin held high despite the chains that clinked around her slender wrists. The auctioneer, a rotund alien with a voice like grinding metal, announced her heritage with glee. Zalera, daughter of the esteemed diplomat from the Altherian Consortium. Rare, intelligent, and unbroken. Starting bid at 5,000 credits. The crowd erupted in murmurs. An Altherian slave was not just a prize but a potential bargaining chip in galactic politics. Ryan stiffened. What was someone like her doing here? 7,000 credits, barked a grotesque alien with a bulbous head. His entourage cackled as he waved a wad of credits. 10,000, shouted another bidder, his insectoid mandibles clicking with excitement. Zalera glared at the crowd, her gaze fierce and unwavering. Ryan felt a pang of guilt. He had no business being here, but something about her expression, pride, anger, and desperation all rolled into one, gnawed at him. He turned to leave. He had debts to pay and no time for distractions. Then the bulbous-headed alien spoke again, his voice dripping with malice. I'll break that pride out of her. Teach her what it means to serve. The crowd roared with laughter. Ryan's fist clenched. He had seen too many people broken, too many lives ruined during his time in the war. He swore he wouldn't get involved, but his conscience wouldn't let him walk away. 20,000 credits, he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. The crowd hushed, turning to look at the scruffy human with the cybernetic arm. The auctioneer raised a brow, clearly surprised. 20,000 credits. Do I hear 25,000? The bulbous-headed alien snarled but didn't raise his bid. The room fell silent. Sold? The auctioneer's gavel slammed down. To the human. Ryan exhaled, already regretting his decision. He approached the stage where a guard shoved Zalera toward him. She stumbled but caught herself, her violet eyes boring into his. Why? She asked, her voice sharp and accented. Ryan shrugged, trying to play it cool. Because someone had to. She tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle she couldn't solve. Don't think this makes you my savior, human? Good, Ryan said, turning to leave. Because I don't want to be. As they walked away from the auction block, Ryan realized he had just stepped into a world of complications. Zalera, however, was already plotting her escape, and her revenge. The silence between Ryan and Zalera as they walked through the crowded corridors of the Zorthan Exchange was deafening. Zalera kept her head high, her defiance undimmed even as the chains around her wrists chafed against her silver skin. Ryan led the way, his cybernetic arm twitching occasionally as he navigated the winding paths toward his dilapidated ship. Where are you taking me? Zalera finally demanded, her voice cutting through the noise. Away from here, Ryan replied without looking back. That's not an answer. Ryan sighed, stopping in his tracks to face her. The flickering neon signs overhead cast eerie shadows across their faces. Look, lady, I just saved your skin. Maybe a thank you would be a good start. Zalera narrowed her violet eyes. Saved me? From one cage to another? I see no difference. Ryan bristled at her words but chose not to argue. You'll have more freedom on my ship than you would have had with that slug who wanted to break you. Now, can we get moving before someone decides to change their mind about letting me leave with you? Zalera didn't respond but reluctantly followed, her chains jangling with each step. Aboard the Wayfarer. Ryan's ship, the Wayfarer, was nothing to boast about. A relic of an earlier time, it had seen better days, or perhaps it hadn't. The hull was battered, the interior dimly lit, and the air smelled faintly of burned circuits. Welcome to your new home, Ryan said sarcastically, waving his arm at the cluttered cargo bay. Zalera's lip curled in disdain as she took in the surroundings. I've seen derelict warships with more charm. Ryan smirked, unshackling her chains. Good thing I'm not running a luxury liner. He tossed the chains aside and gestured toward a small corner with a cot and a makeshift table. You can stay there for now. Don't touch anything you don't understand, or anything at all really. Am I supposed to be grateful for this? Zalera asked, crossing her arms. No, Ryan replied bluntly. I don't need your gratitude. I just need you to stay out of trouble while I figure out what to do with you. And what exactly are you going to do with me? Ryan hesitated. He hadn't thought that far ahead. He had no real use for a former diplomat's daughter, and returning her to her people was a surefire way to paint a target on his back. But selling her wasn't an option either, not after what he'd just done to save her. For now, just stay put and don't cause problems, he said, avoiding the question. Zalera glared at him, her pride clearly stung. You're a coward human. You act noble but you have no plan, no purpose. I can see it in your eyes. Ryan didn't rise to her bait. He turned and walked toward the cockpit, leaving her alone in the cargo bay. The trouble with trust. Hours passed. Zalera paced the confined space of the cargo bay, her mind racing. She had always been sharp, quick to adapt, but this situation tested her resolve. She hated feeling powerless and being at the mercy of a human, a species she had been taught to consider inferior, was an insult she could hardly bear. Her violet eyes scanned the room, taking note of every detail. The wires hanging from the walls, the half-finished repairs on the ship's panels, the poorly secured weapons rack near the corner. If she was going to escape, she needed a plan. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Ryan sat in the pilot's chair, staring at the blinking lights on the control panel. He could feel her anger, her disdain like a weight pressing down on him. He didn't blame her. If their roles were reversed, he'd probably feel the same way. The comm panel crackled to life, jolting him from his thoughts. This is Zorthan Control. We've detected a discrepancy in your transaction records. Return to port immediately for inspection. Ryan cursed under his breath. Of course, the scumbags running the auction wouldn't let him leave so easily. He punched a few buttons, initiating a hasty launch sequence. The ship shuddered as the engines roared to life. Ryan's voice echoed through the ship's intercom. Hold on to something, Princess. We've got company. A sudden escape. In the cargo bay, Zalera barely had time to brace herself as the Wayfarer lurched violently. She stumbled, grabbing onto a support beam to steady herself. What's happening? She shouted, but there was no response. Through a small viewport, she saw several Zorthan patrol ships closing in. Their sleek designs and glowing plasma cannons were a stark contrast to the Wayfarer's clunky appearance. The ship jolted again as Ryan executed a sharp turn, dodging an incoming blast. He swore under his breath, his hands flying across the controls. The Wayfarer wasn't built for combat, but he had a few tricks up his sleeve. Come on, he muttered, activating the ship's cloaking device. For a moment, the pursuing ships hesitated, their sensors struggling to track the Wayfarer. Ryan used the opportunity to dive into a nearby asteroid field, weaving through the massive rocks with precision born of experience. In the cargo bay, Zalera felt her resentment shift to something unexpected: admiration. She didn't want to admit it, but the human had skills. After a tense few minutes, the patrol ships veered off, unable to match Ryan's maneuvering through the treacherous field. The Wayfarer emerged unscathed, and Ryan finally exhaled, slumping back in his chair. An uneasy truce. Ryan returned to the cargo bay, his expression tired but triumphant. We're clear, he said simply. Zalera eyed him warily. You're not as useless as you look, human. Thanks, Ryan replied dryly. I'll take that as a compliment. She hesitated, then added, I owe you, for now. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Don't get too comfortable. You still don't trust me, and I definitely don't trust you. Good, Zalera said, her tone firm. Trust is a dangerous thing. Ryan nodded, surprised by her honesty. Yeah, it is. For the first time, there was a hint of mutual understanding between them, a fragile truce forged in the chaos of their escape. But both knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. The hum of the Wayfarer's engines filled the silence between Ryan and Zalera. The cargo bay had settled into an uneasy calm, but the tension between its two occupants was palpable. Zalera sat cross-legged on the cot, her sharp violet eyes locked onto Ryan, who busied himself at a workbench repairing a cracked stabilizer module. Sparks flew as he welded the jagged edges, his cybernetic arm moving with mechanical precision. You're good at fixing things, Zalera remarked, breaking the silence. Ryan didn't look up. Better at fixing ships than people, he muttered. Zalera tilted her head, studying him. You hide behind that sarcasm. Why? Ryan set the welding tool down with a sigh. Look, I get that you're curious, but we're not exactly friends, okay? Let's keep the personal questions to a minimum. Fine, she said, her tone clipped. Then let's talk about something practical. Like how you plan to keep us alive. Ryan smirked. Us? Funny, you were all set to escape the first chance you got? Zalara's jaw tightened. I'm not blind to reality, human. Alone, my odds of survival are slim. With you, I might stand a chance. Ryan leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. And what do I get out of this little partnership? Her gaze didn't waver. Knowledge. Connections. I may be a fugitive, but I know the galaxy's inner workings better than most. You're just a scavenger scraping by on the fringes? Ryan chuckled. You're not wrong. But how do I know you won't stab me in the back the moment it's convenient? I could have tried to kill you already, she replied bluntly. I didn't. Ryan considered her words, then shrugged. Fair enough. But let's set some ground rules. Rule 1. You don't touch my stuff without asking. Rule 2. You pull your weight. If you're going to stick around, you help keep this rust bucket running. Zalara arched a brow. Agreed. And I have a rule for you, no more chains. If you're serious about this partnership, treat me like an equal. Ryan hesitated, then nodded. Deal? The first test. It didn't take long for their fragile alliance to be tested. A distress signal blared through the cockpit's comm system just as Ryan and Zalara were settling into their uneasy routine. The signal was garbled but clear enough to convey urgency. A merchant ship under attack. Ryan's fingers hovered over the controls. Could be a trap, he said half to himself. Could also be legitimate, Zalara pointed out. And if it is, ignoring it makes us no better than the pirates? Ryan shot her a skeptical look. You're awfully idealistic for someone who just escaped slavery. Call it pragmatism, she replied. If we help them, they might reward us. Supplies, information, allies. He sighed. Fine. But if this goes south, I'm blaming you. As the Wayfarer approached the source of the signal, they found a battered freighter under siege by 2 sleek pirate ships. Laser fire raked across the freighter's hull, and its shields flickered dangerously. Shields at 20%, Zalara reported from the co-pilot's seat. They won't last much longer. Ryan gritted his teeth. All right, let's see if we can even the odds. He powered up the ship's weapons, a modest arsenal but enough to make a difference in the right hands. Zalara watched as he expertly maneuvered the Wayfarer, cutting between the pirates and drawing their fire. She couldn't help but feel a grudging respect for his piloting skills. Target their engines, she suggested. Disable them rather than destroy them. It'll send a message. Ryan raised an eyebrow but followed her advice. The Wayfarer's plasma cannons fired, scoring a direct hit on one of the pirate ships. Its engines sputtered and died, leaving it adrift. The second pirate ship broke off its attack, realizing the odds had shifted. With a parting volley of laser fire, it turned tail and fled. The comm crackled to life. This is Captain Drayak of the freighter Starlight. Whoever you are, thank you. We owe you our lives. Ryan responded tersely. You're welcome. But gratitude doesn't fill fuel tanks. Got anything to trade? A fragile friendship. The Starlight crew proved to be more than willing to share supplies in exchange for their rescue. Ryan and Zalara helped oversee the transfer of fuel and rations while repairs were made to the freighter's hull. Captain Drayak, a grizzled Sarnathian with 4 arms and a perpetual scowl, approached Ryan. You've got guts, human. Not many would take on pirates with a ship like yours. Ryan shrugged. Desperate times? Drayak's gaze shifted to Zalara. And her? What's her story? She's with me, Ryan said firmly, cutting off any further questions. Drayak smirked. Fair enough. Watch your back though. That one's got fire in her eyes. After the freighter departed, Ryan and Zalara returned to the cockpit. The tension between them had lessened slightly, replaced by a tentative camaraderie. You did well out there, Ryan admitted. Your call to disable their engines was smart. Zalara allowed herself a small smile. And you're not as reckless as I thought. A ghost from the past. As the Wayfarer drifted through hyperspace, a notification pinged on the ship's console. Ryan frowned as he read the message. A bounty had been placed on his head, courtesy of the Zorthan exchange. Great, he muttered. Now they're after me. Zalara leaned over his shoulder, reading the message. And they're offering a substantial reward. You must have made quite an impression. Yeah, well, I've got a knack for pissing off the wrong people. Zalara's expression grew serious. This changes everything. They'll send hunters after us. Mercenaries, bounty hunters, maybe even warlords. Thanks for the pep talk, Ryan said dryly. Any suggestions? She hesitated, then nodded. There's a place. A hidden station on the outskirts of the Calderon Nebula. It's a haven for outlaws, smugglers, and fugitives. If we lay low there, we might be able to regroup. Ryan considered her suggestion. And you know this because? My family had connections there, she admitted. Before everything fell apart. Ryan studied her, weighing his options. All right. Set a course. But if this is a trap. It's not, she interrupted. You'll just have to trust me. For the first time, Ryan found himself wanting to believe her. The Wayfarer emerged from hyperspace, its hull shimmering faintly from the transition. Ahead lay the Calderon Nebula, a roiling sea of purples and blues, its volatile gases swirling like the brushstrokes of a cosmic artist. Somewhere within this mesmerizing chaos was the station Zalera spoke of, a hidden haven for those who lived on the galaxy's fringes. Ryan sat in the pilot's seat, scanning the nebula with narrowed eyes. You sure about this? Flying into a nebula isn't exactly my idea of a good time. Zalera, seated beside him, leaned forward, her gaze fixed on the viewport. It's dangerous, yes. But that's precisely why the station survives. No sane bounty hunter would follow us here. Great. I love betting my life on insanity, Ryan muttered, adjusting the ship's trajectory. As they entered the nebula, the ship's sensors began to flicker, overwhelmed by the electromagnetic interference. Ryan's grip tightened on the controls as turbulence rocked the Wayfarer. Stay on course, Zalera urged, pointing to a faint beacon flashing intermittently on the navigation screen. That signal will lead us to the station. Ryan gritted his teeth. Let's hope this place is worth the trouble. The hidden haven. After what felt like an eternity of navigating the nebula's treacherous currents, the station finally came into view. It was an impressive sight, a sprawling structure built into the hollowed-out remains of an asteroid. Its exterior was a patchwork of metal and rock, bristling with weaponry and shield generators. Neon lights flickered along its edges, casting eerie glows into the surrounding void. Welcome to Haven's Edge, Zalera announced, her tone a mix of nostalgia and caution. Ryan brought the Wayfarer into the station's docking bay, where a motley crew of mechanics and guards awaited. As the ship settled onto its landing struts, he turned to Zalera. All right, what's the play here? We find my contact, she replied. If he's still here, he can help us lay low and maybe even gather intel on the bounty. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Your contact. How do you know he won't sell us out? Zalera's lips thinned. I don't. But he owes my family a debt. That should buy us some goodwill. Ryan sighed. I love plans with should in them. A tense reunion. The interior of Haven's Edge was a labyrinth of dimly lit corridors, crowded markets, and shadowy alcoves. Merchants hawked illicit goods, while mercenaries and smugglers conducted business over drinks. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and engine grease. Zalera led the way, her posture stiff but confident. Ryan followed closely, his hand never far from his sidearm. He could feel eyes on them, curious, calculating, and potentially hostile. They arrived at a dingy cantina tucked into a corner of the station. Zalera scanned the room, her gaze settling on a figure seated in a private booth. The man was a hulking Vortian with mottled green skin and a single cybernetic eye. He looked up as they approached, his expression shifting from suspicion to recognition. Well, he rumbled, his voice like gravel. If it isn't little Zalera. Hello, Kren, she said evenly, sliding into the booth. I need your help. Kren leaned back, folding his massive arms. And why would I risk my neck for you? Last I heard, your family was indisposed. Zalera's jaw tightened. My family may be gone, but their debts aren't. You owe us, Kren. And now I'm here to collect. Kren's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on her. After a long pause, he barked a laugh. Still got that fire, I see. All right, I'll bite. What do you need? We're being hunted, Zalera explained. By the Zorthan Exchange. We need a safe place to regroup and any information you can dig up on the bounty. Kren's amusement faded. The Exchange? You really know how to pick your enemies, don't you? Ryan, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. Can you help us or not? Kren eyed him, his lips curling into a sly grin. And who's this? Your new bodyguard? Zalera smirked. Something like that. Kren snorted. Fine. You can stay here for a while. But my help isn't free. There's a job that needs doing, a simple cargo run. Do it and I'll see what I can dig up. Ryan frowned. What kind of cargo? Kren's grin widened. The kind that doesn't concern you as long as it gets delivered. The job. Reluctantly, Ryan and Zalera agreed to Kren's terms. The cargo, a set of sealed crates, was loaded onto the Wayfarer, along with coordinates for the delivery. As they departed Haven's Edge, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. "This feels too easy," he muttered, steering the ship toward the designated location. "Trust me, Kren's not the type to double-cross someone he owes," Zalera reassured him. "But he's also not above testing our competence." Their destination turned out to be a derelict space station orbiting a dead planet. The station's docking bay was dark and foreboding, its walls scarred by years of neglect. As Ryan and Zalera unloaded the crates, a group of armed figures emerged from the shadows. "You must be Kren's errand runners," their leader sneered, a reptilian alien with jagged teeth and a cybernetic arm. "Hand over the cargo and we won't have any trouble." Ryan glanced at Zalera, who nodded subtly. Together they stepped back, allowing the aliens to inspect the crates. But as the leader pried one open, his expression twisted with fury. "This isn't what we agreed on," he roared, drawing a weapon. Ryan didn't hesitate. With a quick draw he fired a shot that disarmed the leader. Chaos erupted as the other aliens opened fire, but Ryan and Zalera fought back with precision and coordination. Zalera's agility and sharp aim complemented Ryan's brute force and cybernetic enhancements. Within moments the skirmish was over. The aliens lay defeated and the cargo was intact. "Looks like Kren set us up after all," Ryan muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Zalera smirked. "Or he wanted to see if we could handle ourselves. Either way we passed." A new lead. Back at Haven's Edge, Kren greeted them with a toothy grin. "Impressive. I didn't think you had it in you." Ryan crossed his arms. "We held up our end of the deal. Now it's your turn." Kren nodded, sliding a datapad across the table. "Here's what I found. The exchange is using bounty hunters to track you, but their real goal is something bigger. Rumor has it they're after an artifact, a relic of the old war. And they think you have it?" Zalera's eyes widened. "That's impossible. Those artifacts were lost centuries ago." Kren shrugged. "Tell that to the exchange. Whatever this thing is, they're willing to kill anyone who gets in their way." Ryan glanced at Zalera. "Looks like we've got a new problem." She met his gaze, determination flickering in her eyes. "Then we'll solve it. Together." The revelations from Kren set Ryan and Zalera on edge. The idea that the Zorthan exchange was hunting them not merely for money, but for something tied to the ancient and deadly artifacts of the old war, added a new layer of danger. What exactly did the exchange think they had? And why was it worth deploying an armada of bounty hunters? Back aboard the Wayfarer, the duo mulled over their next move. The artifact's mystery. Zalera stared at the datapad Kren had provided, her expression a mixture of confusion and unease. The file detailed rumors and fragmented records of a relic known as the Heart of Calixis. Supposedly, it was a device capable of channeling energy on a massive scale, enough to destroy planets or power entire civilizations. Long thought to be a myth, its potential existence was a chilling prospect. "This doesn't make sense," she murmured. "Even if the artifact were real, why would they think we have it?" Ryan leaned back in his seat, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the armrest. "Maybe it's not about us. Maybe it's about someone you know. Your family, maybe?" Zalera's jaw tightened. The mention of her family always hit a nerve, but Ryan had a point. Her father had been a prominent figure in the galactic resistance during the Old War. If anyone had access to such a weapon, it might have been him. "Possible," she admitted reluctantly. "But even if my father had the artifact, it would have been hidden long before I was born." Ryan leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Hidden where? If the exchange is chasing us, they must think we're connected somehow." Zalera sighed, rubbing her temples. "I don't know. My father was careful about compartmentalizing secrets. There's only one place that might have answers. Our family's old estate on Valyria." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Isn't Valyria under the exchange's control?" "Yes," Zalera admitted, "but it's also vast and sparsely populated. If we're careful, we can slip in unnoticed." Ryan stood, his expression resolute. "Then we'd better move fast before the exchange tightens their grip." Journey to Valyria. Navigating through the nebula once more, the Wayfarer charted a course for Valyria. The journey took several tense hours, with Ryan constantly scanning for signs of pursuit. Though they managed to avoid detection, the looming threat of the exchange weighed heavily on their minds. Zalera spent much of the trip in silence, her thoughts racing. Returning to her homeworld was a bittersweet prospect. Valyria had been a place of beauty and learning, but also the site of her family's downfall. The thought of walking through its ruins filled her with dread. Ryan noticed her unease. "You all right?" She hesitated before nodding. "Just preparing myself." It's been years since I've been back. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll get through this. Together. The ghosts of Valyria. Valyria was a world of stark contrast. Its surface was a tapestry of verdant forests, crystalline lakes, and jagged mountain ranges. But the signs of the exchange's occupation were evident. As the wayfarer descended through the atmosphere, they spotted clusters of industrial facilities, their smokestacks belching dark plumes into the sky. Scattered patrols of exchange ships prowled the air, forcing Ryan to take a circuitous route to avoid detection. The estate was nestled in a secluded valley, its towering spires visible even from a distance. Though much of it was overgrown and weathered, the grandeur of its architecture still shone through. Ryan guided the ship to a hidden landing spot nearby, masking its signature with a camouflage net. Looks like nobody's been here in years, Ryan remarked as they disembarked. That's the idea, Zalera replied, scanning the horizon. My father designed the estate to be self-sufficient and defensible. Even if it's been abandoned, it should still have power and archives intact. As they approached the main gates, Zalera activated a concealed panel. After a moment of hesitation, she entered a code, a string of numbers she hadn't thought about in years. To her relief, the gates groaned open, revealing a pathway lined with statues and ancient trees. Inside, the estate was eerily quiet. Dust coated the furniture and cobwebs clung to the walls. But the air was charged with a sense of history, as if the place were holding its breath. This is where you grew up? Ryan asked, his voice hushed. Part of it, Zalera replied, her tone distant. My father kept his work private. The answers we're looking for are likely in the vault beneath the library. Unlocking the past. The library was a vast chamber filled with towering shelves, many of them now empty or collapsed. At its center was a grand staircase leading down to the vault. Zalera led the way, her steps deliberate but hurried. The vault door was a massive construct of reinforced metal, adorned with intricate carvings. Zalera approached a biometric scanner, placing her hand on its surface. The device hummed to life, scanning her palm before emitting a soft chime. The door slowly creaked open. Inside was a room filled with hollow displays, data terminals, and storage crates. Zalera immediately began searching the records, her fingers flying across the controls. Ryan stood guard, his senses alert for any signs of danger. After several minutes, Zalera froze, her eyes fixed on a particular file. I found it, she whispered. What does it say? Ryan asked, stepping closer. Zalera activated the display, revealing schematics and notes about the heart of Calixus. According to the records, her father had discovered the artifact during the Old War and deemed it too dangerous to use. He had hidden it in a remote sector, encrypting its location with a complex code. It's real, Zalera said, her voice trembling. And now the exchange wants it? Ryan frowned. Do these files say where it is? Zalera shook her head. The coordinates are encrypted. My father's encryption key is stored in a separate data core. If it still exists, it's likely on his personal terminal. Where's that? Ryan asked. In his study, Zalera replied, a note of dread creeping into her voice. On the upper floor. An unwelcome visitor. As they exited the vault, a distant sound caught Ryan's attention. A low rumble that didn't belong to the estate's machinery. Trouble, he muttered, drawing his weapon. They hurried to a window, peering out to see an exchange patrol craft descending into the valley. Several figures disembarked, their movements precise and coordinated. They must have tracked us, Zalera said, her voice tight with fear. Ryan's jaw clenched. Then we don't have much time. Get the key and I'll hold them off. Zalera hesitated, her eyes searching his. You can't fight them all? Maybe not, Ryan said with a wry smile, but I can buy us enough time. Go. She nodded reluctantly, her hand brushing his arm before she turned and sprinted up the stairs. The moment Zalera disappeared up the staircase, Ryan turned his attention back to the incoming exchange patrol. Through the dusty window, he counted 6 figures moving in formation, each armed and wearing tactical armor. They weren't ordinary grunts, these were elite operatives. The exchange wasn't taking any chances. Ryan muttered to himself, of course they'd send the big guns. Setting the trap. He quickly assessed the terrain inside the estate. The long corridors and ancient furniture gave him plenty of cover but little maneuverability. Fortunately, the towering shelves and heavy tables could be repurposed into barricades. Ryan moved swiftly, upturning a grand oak table to create a makeshift barrier near the entrance to the library. He checked his weapon, a plasma pistol low on charge. Would have to do. Scanning the area for anything useful, His eyes landed on a row of ancient decorative vases perched on a high shelf. A grin spread across his face as he positioned himself behind the table, taking aim at the fragile pottery. The sound of the exchange operatives' boots echoed through the estate. They were coming in fast. Zalara's search. Meanwhile, Zalara ascended the winding staircase to her father's study, her heart pounding in her chest. The memories of this place flooded back, her father's stern voice, the smell of old books, the hum of hollow displays. It felt like stepping into a time capsule of her childhood. The study was just as she remembered, an expansive room filled with shelves, a large desk, and a central terminal built into the far wall. Dust coated everything, but the terminal's power light still blinked faintly. Zalara rushed to it, fingers flying over the controls as she bypassed the security protocols. Her father's encryption key had to be here. The terminal's interface flickered to life, displaying a familiar passcode prompt. She hesitated for a moment, then entered the code her father had taught her as a child. The screen unlocked, revealing a trove of files. Come on, she whispered, scrolling through the directories. The sound of distant gunfire snapped her attention back to the present. Ryan was already engaging the enemy. She worked faster, locating the file labeled encryption key. As the data began transferring to her wrist pad, a chill ran down her spine. She wasn't alone. The faintest creak of floorboards behind her made her freeze. Zalara turned slowly to see a shadow moving along the wall. One of the operatives had broken off from the group and was heading straight for her. Ryan's standoff. Downstairs, Ryan fired the first shot, deliberately aiming at the vases above the operatives' heads. The plasma bolt shattered the pottery, raining shards down on the intruders and forcing them to scatter. He used the moment of confusion to fire again, hitting one operative square in the chest. The man crumpled to the ground with a groan. 5 to go, Ryan muttered, ducking as a barrage of return fire scorched the air above him. The operatives moved with precision, flanking him from both sides. Ryan ducked behind the barricade, narrowly avoiding a plasma bolt that melted a hole through the ancient wood. He peeked out, spotting 2 operatives advancing up the left side. Gritting his teeth, he fired blindly, buying himself a few precious seconds. "You've got this," he whispered to himself. "Just stall them a little longer." Zalara's fight. Back in the study, Zalara grabbed a small statuette from the desk, holding it like a club. Her heart raced as the shadow grew closer. She crouched behind the desk, steadying her breathing. When the operative stepped into the room, she struck with all her strength, the heavy object connecting with the side of his head. The man staggered but didn't fall. He turned toward her, his helmet hiding any expression of pain. Zalara swung again, but this time he caught her wrist, twisting it painfully until she dropped the statuette. Thinking fast, she jabbed her knee into his stomach, causing him to loosen his grip. She grabbed the nearest object, a sharp letter opener, and slashed at his arm. The blade didn't pierce his armor, but it gave her enough space to back away toward the terminal. The data transfer was almost complete, but the operative wasn't slowing down. He raised his weapon, and Zalara dove behind the desk as a bolt of plasma seared the air where she'd been standing. Desperation surged through her. She grabbed a nearby chair and threw it at the operative. The distraction worked just long enough for the terminal to beep, signaling that the transfer was complete. Zalara yanked the wrist pad off the terminal and bolted for the door. A dangerous reunion. Ryan's situation was deteriorating. The operatives were closing in, their tactics forcing him into tighter quarters. His pistol was almost out of charge and he was running out of options. Just as he prepared for a last-ditch stand, Zalara appeared at the top of the staircase, panting and holding her wrist pad. Her voice rang out, sharp and clear, "I've got the key." The operatives turned their attention toward her, and Ryan seized the opportunity. With a roar, he vaulted over his barricade, tackling one of the soldiers to the ground. The element of surprise allowed him to wrestle the man's weapon away, and he used it to take down another operative. "Get to the ship," Ryan yelled, firing at the remaining soldiers to cover Zalara's retreat. She didn't need to be told twice. Sprinting down the corridor, she navigated the labyrinthine estate toward the exit. Ryan followed, his stolen weapon blazing. The remaining operatives were close behind, their shouts echoing through the halls. The narrow escape. Bursting out into the open air, Ryan and Zalara sprinted toward the Wayfarer. The exchange patrol craft was still parked nearby, its engines humming ominously. Ryan aimed at it, firing several shots at its thrusters. The bolts didn't destroy the craft but managed to disable one of its engines, grounding it temporarily. "That won't hold them for long," Ryan shouted as they climbed aboard the Wayfarer. Zalera dashed to the cockpit, firing up the ship's systems. The Wayfarer roared to life, lifting off just as the exchange operatives emerged from the estate. Plasma bolts peppered the hull, but the ship's shields held as they ascended into the atmosphere. Coordinates? Ryan asked, sliding into the co-pilot's seat. Zalera pulled up the data on her wrist pad, inputting the encrypted file. "I've got the location," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Good," Ryan replied, gripping the controls. "Because they're not going to stop until we find it first." The Wayfarer hummed with quiet intensity as it sped through the star-streaked void of hyperspace. Ryan sat in the cockpit, his hands gripping the controls with practiced ease, but his mind was a storm. Zalera had plugged the encryption key into the ship's NAV system, and now it was guiding them toward a remote, uncharted sector of the galaxy. "Where exactly are we going?" Ryan asked, glancing at Zalera as she studied the holographic map glowing on her wrist pad. "To the sanctuary of Eresus," she replied, her voice a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "It's where my father hid the master key, the one that could dismantle the exchange's entire network." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "And you think they don't already know where it is?" "They don't," Zalera said confidently. "My father encrypted the coordinates and scattered fragments of the data across multiple locations. The key I retrieved was the final piece." Ryan sighed, leaning back in his seat. "Let's hope you're right." Tension on the ship. The silence that followed was heavy. Zalera couldn't help but notice Ryan's distant expression. It wasn't like him to brood. His usual sarcastic edge had been dulled since their escape from her family's estate. "You're quiet," she said softly. "Just thinking," Ryan replied, his eyes fixed on the swirling hyperspace tunnel. "This whole thing feels too clean. We barely got out of there alive, but they didn't send any reinforcements. Doesn't that strike you as odd?" Zalera hesitated, biting her lip. She had been so focused on retrieving the key that she hadn't considered the possibility of a larger scheme. "You think they let us escape?" "Maybe," Ryan said. "Or maybe someone tipped them off in the first place." Zalera's eyes narrowed. "You're not accusing me, are you?" Ryan shook his head. "No, but we're dealing with the exchange. They've probably been 2 steps ahead of us this whole time." Approaching the sanctuary. Their conversation was interrupted by the ship's computer, which chimed to signal their arrival. The Wayfarer dropped out of hyperspace, revealing a massive asteroid field suspended in the inky blackness of space. At its center was a large, metallic station hidden within the shadows of a colossal asteroid. It glowed faintly, its exterior covered in ancient symbols and flickering lights. "That's it," Zalera said, her voice tinged with awe. "The sanctuary of Eresus." Ryan maneuvered the ship through the asteroid field, avoiding jagged rocks and drifting debris. As they approached, the station's docking bay opened, its automated systems pulling them in. The ship landed with a soft thud, and the engines powered down. Ryan grabbed his blaster, checking its charge. "Stay close. If this place has been untouched for years, it might have some surprises waiting for us." Zalera nodded, strapping on a small energy blade holstered at her hip. The two exited the ship, stepping into the cold, dimly lit docking bay. The secrets within. The station was eerily quiet. Dust floated through the air, disturbed only by their footsteps. Zalera led the way, guided by the map on her wrist pad. They passed through winding corridors, their flashlights illuminating long-forgotten murals and carvings. The artwork depicted a time before the exchange, a time when the galaxy was ruled by a coalition of free worlds. "This place is ancient," Zalera whispered, running her fingers over the carvings. "It's more than just a sanctuary. It's a monument to what the galaxy once was." Ryan kept his blaster raised, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Let's hope it's more than just a history lesson." After several minutes, they reached a large chamber at the station's core. At its center was a pedestal holding a small, glowing device, the master key. It pulsed with a soft, golden light, casting long shadows across the room. "There it is," Zalera said, her voice trembling with anticipation. Ryan approached cautiously, his blaster trained on the device. "Too easy." The moment he spoke, the room came alive. Walls shifted, revealing hidden panels as a dozen armed drones emerged, their weapons locking onto the intruders. "Of course," Ryan muttered, diving behind a nearby pillar as the drones opened fire. The battle for the key. Ryan's instincts kicked in. He returned fire, his plasma bolts ricocheting off the drone's armored shells. Zalera activated her energy blade, its blue glow cutting through the darkness. She darted forward, slicing through the nearest drone with precision, its sparking remains collapsing to the floor. Stay low. Ryan shouted, firing at another drone. These things are tougher than they look. Zalera nodded, using her agility to dodge incoming fire. She reached the pedestal, her heart pounding as she grabbed the master key. The moment her fingers touched it, the drones recalibrated, focusing all their fire on her. Not good, she muttered, ducking behind the pedestal. Ryan noticed her predicament and charged toward her, firing relentlessly. We need to disable them, he shouted. Zalera glanced at the pedestal's base, noticing a control panel. Cover me, she yelled, frantically typing into the panel. The drone's movements became erratic as her commands disrupted their systems. With one final input, the drones froze in place before collapsing to the ground, lifeless. Nice work, Ryan said, panting as he leaned against a pillar. Remind me to never doubt your hacking skills. The betrayal. As the dust settled, Zalera held the master key in her hands. It felt warm, almost alive, its energy resonating with her. She looked at Ryan, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. We did it, she said. But Ryan's expression darkened. His blaster remained raised, not at the drones but at her. Drop it, he said coldly. Zalera froze, her smile fading. What are you doing? You tell me, Ryan replied. This whole thing, your escape, the key, the drones, it's all too convenient. Who are you really working for? Zalera's eyes widened. You think I'm working for the exchange? Ryan didn't lower his weapon. Prove me wrong. Tears welled in Zalera's eyes as she stepped toward him, the master key still in her hands. After everything we've been through, you still don't trust me? Ryan's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could respond, a deep voice echoed through the chamber. Very perceptive, human. Both Ryan and Zalera turned to see a tall figure step out of the shadows, flanked by more armed operatives. It was Varric, the exchange officer who had pursued them relentlessly. You led us right to it, Varric said, his reptilian face twisting into a sinister grin. Well done, Zalera. Zalera's blood ran cold. No, that's not. Spare me your lies, Varric interrupted. You played your part perfectly. Now hand over the key. Ryan's grip on his blaster tightened as he took a step back, his mind racing. Zalera's betrayal, or apparent betrayal, was like a knife to the heart. But the look in her eyes told a different story, one of shock, anger, and defiance. Ryan, she whispered, her voice trembling. You have to trust me. Ryan hesitated, caught between his instincts and the connection they had forged. The fate of the galaxy rested in the next decision he made. The room seemed to close in on Ryan as Varric's operatives stepped forward, their weapons aimed at him and Zalera. The tension was palpable. Ryan's mind raced, but his instincts screamed at him to hold steady, to wait for the right moment. The weight of the master key in Zalera's hands only made the situation more fragile. She had risked everything for this key and now it seemed to have been all for nothing. You can't trust her, Varric said, his voice calm but menacing. She's been playing you from the start, human. The exchange doesn't leave anything to chance, not even this. Ryan glanced at Zalera. She was standing tall, her expression a mixture of pain and determination. He could see the tremble in her hands, the fear in her eyes. She was fighting for something, but what? Zalera, he said, his voice soft but firm. Tell me it's not true. Tell me you haven't been playing me all along. Her eyes flickered with emotion, her voice quivering as she spoke. I didn't have a choice, Ryan. You have to understand, I never wanted this. I was trapped. The exchange, they have my family. My brother, he's still with them. Ryan's mind reeled. Her family? That explained her initial reluctance to cross the exchange. But it didn't explain everything. She had told him she wanted freedom, but was she simply trying to save her brother? Or had she been lying the whole time? I'm not lying, she insisted, taking a step toward him. I did everything I could to get here, everything I could to get the key so I could free my brother. I never wanted to betray you. Please, Ryan, Before she could finish, Varric laughed, cutting through her words like a blade. She's stalling. You're wasting time. Ryan's heart pounded. He glanced at Varric, then back at Zalera. His grip on his blaster tightened, but he wasn't ready to fire, not yet. Zalera's words had sounded too sincere, too desperate. Why should I believe you? Ryan demanded, his voice now sharp with betrayal. You've lied to me from the beginning, used me to get here. You even helped the exchange set up the trap on Aresa Station. I didn't know about the trap, Zalera exclaimed, her voice cracking with emotion. I swear. When I found out, I tried to warn you. But I couldn't. I couldn't tell you everything. The exchange, they have too much power. They control everything. Ryan felt a cold chill run down his spine as the reality of their situation hit him. He had always known that they were fighting against overwhelming odds, but now the true scope of their struggle was clearer than ever. The exchange was everywhere, controlling even the lives of those they fought for. Zalera stepped closer, her eyes pleading. Ryan, please. If you help me, we can end this. Together. I can help you destroy the exchange. But you have to trust me. Ryan stared at her, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He had seen her vulnerability, her pain. He had seen the genuine fear in her eyes when she spoke of her family. But was that enough to erase the doubt, the betrayal he felt in his chest? You want me to trust you, Ryan said slowly, his voice full of sorrow. But how can I? Everything you've told me, it's all been one lie after another. I don't know what's real anymore. Zalera took another step, her hands raised as if to show she meant no harm. What's real is this, what we've shared. That's real, Ryan. What we're fighting for, it's real. You and I, we can be the ones to end the exchange. But not if we're divided. Ryan felt his resolve begin to waver, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he found himself uncertain. Could he really throw everything away because of one mistake? Or was this something bigger, something they could fix together? I can't do this alone, Zalera continued, her voice softer now. And neither can you. Not anymore. Please, Ryan, help me. A silence fell over the room, broken only by the hum of the station's machinery. Ryan's mind churned, his heart torn between the woman standing before him, the woman he had fought beside, cared for, and the crushing weight of everything that had been kept from him. But just as he opened his mouth to respond, a voice rang out. Enough. Varric's calm voice filled the room with a menacing authority. His figure loomed in the shadows, his eyes cold as he surveyed the scene. The game is over. You've played your part, Zalera. Now give me the key. Ryan's gaze snapped to Varric. The moment of truth had arrived. Zalera's shoulders slumped, but her eyes met Ryan's with a mix of defiance and regret. You have to decide, Ryan. We don't have much time. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest. The master key, the future of the galaxy, was in Zalera's hands. And yet, it wasn't just the key that mattered now. It was their trust, their bond, their chance at redemption. Tell me you're not lying, Ryan said, his voice low but steady. Tell me you're not playing me. I'm not, Zalera whispered, her voice filled with sincerity. I swear. Ryan hesitated for a heartbeat, then made his decision. He raised his blaster, aiming it at Varric. You'll never control me, Ryan spat, his voice full of fury. And you'll never control her. Before Varric could react, Ryan fired, taking down one of the exchange operatives. Zalera moved in a flash, her energy blade slicing through the remaining soldiers as she rushed to his side. Together, they fought with a fury born of desperation and defiance. Varric, realizing that his grip was slipping, retreated toward the shadows, his voice tinged with anger. This isn't over, Varric growled, disappearing into the depths of the station. Ryan and Zalera stood in the aftermath, panting and bloodied, but victorious. They had faced the ultimate test of their bond and emerged stronger. Zalera turned to him, her voice a whisper. We did it. Ryan nodded, his hand reaching for hers. No more lies. No more secrets. Together they would take on the galaxy. Together they would dismantle the exchange. Together they would fight for their future, and the future of the galaxy. And in that moment, Ryan knew that no matter the cost, no matter the obstacles, they would face it together. No one could take that from them. The end. Thank you for joining us on this epic journey. Until next time, remember, no matter the odds, love and courage always find a way.